You think scrubbing floors gives you value? Mark's voice cracked like glass under pressure. Without warning, he yanked a milk carton from the counter and poured it over Elena's head. The cold liquid streamed down her golden hair, soaked her pale blue uniform, and bled into the fabric like guilt that couldn't be rinsed out. There was no pause, no second thought. Just humiliation poured out as casually as creamer into coffee. A jagged ripple of laughter echoed. Not loud, but sharp enough to split the silence. People turned away, faces dipped into their phones, eyes glued to screens they weren't even reading. Cowards in high heels and neckties, pretending they hadn't witnessed cruelty unfolding 5 feet away. Helena, however, didn't move. Her mascara had started to smudge, black trails staining pale cheeks, but her eyes remained fixed and glassy. They didn't blink. They didn't soften. And what stared out from behind them wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It was colder than both, something more dangerous. Patience. The kind of patience that waits years to speak and hits like an avalanche when it finally does. In the corner, a janitor moved without a sound, cloth swiping across the glass door in methodical arcs. His name was Jackson. No one noticed him. They never did. That's the thing about being invisible in a room full of people desperate to be seen. They assumed he was just another man in overalls. What they didn't know was that the man wiping their smudged glass doors was the same one who signed their paychecks. They weren't mocking the janitor. They were mocking the owner of the ground they stood on. He moved down the marble corridor slowly, rhythmically, like he'd done it for decades. His shirt was wrinkled, shoes scuffed, name tag a simple black badge that read, J. Clay. People passed by him without so much as a nod. To them, he was background noise, part of the building, like a vent or an elevator ding. But Jackson saw everything. He watched the way people sat, how their backs bent when they laughed, how quickly they looked away when guilt scratched at their conscience. He saw Mark stroll through the hallway like a self-crowned king, and he saw Elena disappear behind the break room door with her chin held perfectly still. Still. Like if she moved, something inside might break. Jackson didn't speak. He didn't hurry. He wiped the milk from the tile floor with slow, even strokes, each line carved with precision. They all thought he was just a janitor. But for 6 weeks now, Jackson had been cleaning more than just floors. He was the CEO of Eterna, and he was building a case against his own company from the inside out. As he cleaned the inside of the glass door, his reflection blurred with each circle he made. Beyond it, voices grew louder. "Decaf!" Mark barked, sharp enough to slice through conversation. The intern jumped. "I said Colombian dark roast." The young man fumbled for words, but Mark didn't wait. "You've got one job. If you can't handle coffee, maybe you should be wiping tables next to our janitor." Another round of that same nervous, performative laughter followed, this time a bit louder, like they needed to prove their allegiance. Jackson didn't stop wiping, but he took mental notes. Every word, every eye that averted, every face that twisted into a smirk. This wasn't about coffee. It was about power, and how some men used it not to lead, but to wound. Mark thought he owned the room. What he didn't know was the janitor already held the ending to his story. "Hey, intern," Mark shouted, tossing a crumpled receipt like a grenade. "Run and get the right coffee this time, and use your own cash. We don't reimburse incompetence." Jeremy blinked hard. 19. Nervous. He nodded too quickly, as if moving fast enough would make him invisible, and scurried out the door. Behind him, someone chuckled, a low, venomous sound. When he returned, Jeremy sat alone on the edge of the break room table, counting coins like they were pieces of his own worth. His shoulders folded in on themselves, curling like pages in a wet book. Jackson passed without a word. But just before he left, he slipped a folded bill under the edge of Jeremy's desk. Silent, undetected. Hours later, Jeremy would find it, with 2 words scribbled on the back in soft pencil. "You matter." Jackson didn't speak often, but when he did, it landed like a stone in still water. Across the hallway, shoes tapped and conversations clipped, slicing through the quiet with practiced indifference. No one noticed the man from shipping wrestling with an overloaded cart, wheels stuck in the carpet. His limp made it harder. His silence made it invisible. No one stopped. No one helped, except Elena. She stepped forward, didn't say a word, just placed her hands on the handle and pushed. Together the cart inched forward. The man gave a grateful nod, but neither of them needed words. It was a private act of humanity in a place starving for it. From the far end of the hall, Jackson paused. He didn't intervene. He didn't need to. His eyes narrowed slightly, like a lock had clicked into place. Elena wasn't here for a paycheck. There was depth in her silence, layers that weren't visible on the surface. And Jackson had seen that kind of silence before. It belonged to people who had been broken but chose to stand anyway. In the conference room, Mark leaned back with practiced ease, legs crossed, a smirk dancing at the corner of his lips. Around him sat a circle of mid-level managers, nodding in all the right places, laughter surfacing too quickly. "You know what I love about Roos?" he said, tapping 2 fingers against the table. "Nobody expects you to be nice. The strong don't waste time on manners. Respect? That's for the weak." A few weak laughs followed, more out of fear than humor. One man glanced at the door, as if he hoped someone might interrupt. Mark went on, voice oily and smug. "People don't remember kindness. They remember fear." Outside the glass wall, Jackson continued cleaning the window frame. He didn't speak, but his gaze sharpened as it landed on Mark, like he was reading a sickness growing behind polished teeth. This wasn't just poor management. It was a virus, embedded in culture, spreading from one smug laugh to the next. At the door stood Marta, holding a doctor's note in both hands. The paper trembled slightly. So did she. Marta had worked at Turner for 9 years. Her back ached from years of lifting, standing, bending. This was her first sick day in 6 months. Mark didn't read the note. He didn't need to. "Sick?" he mocked. "You're already slow. Now you want time off?" His next words landed like a hammer. "You're dismissed." Effective immediately. No one moved. One manager looked down at his laptop. Another adjusted his watch. A woman chewed the inside of her cheek, but said nothing. Marta blinked hard, nodded once, and walked away. Her steps were small, deliberate, wounded. At a nearby counter, Jackson clenched the cleaning rag in his fist, the fabric twisting like rope between his fingers. They always crushed the quiet ones first, and no one ever said a word. Until now. "Not here, not in front of him," Mark added almost casually, like the cruelty was incidental. "Honestly, you should be grateful you're still on payroll." From the far end of the corridor, Jackson dragged the mop across the tile a fraction slower than usual. Not because he was tired, because every word Mark spoke etched itself deeper into his memory. Each injustice layered itself onto something that had been quietly building. The floor wasn't the only thing he was cleaning. He was collecting rot, and soon it would be burned down to the foundation. The numbers on the spreadsheets weren't the real failure. The culture was. The cracks were in the laughter, in the silences, in the way no one looked each other in the eye anymore. The rot was coming from the top. Late at night, long after the noise died, the only sounds in the office were the quiet hum of machines and the faint clicking of keys. Jackson sat alone at a dusty desk tucked away in the mailroom, logged into a ghost-level admin account he'd built quietly on day 1. Most people never noticed. That was the point. He scrolled through feedback logs and internal reports. Most were minor, supply orders, scheduling tweaks, maintenance requests. But beneath those layers, deeper down in the archive, he unearthed something else. A pattern. Dozens of complaints, each one flagged, each one buried before it ever saw the light of HR. Verbal threats, public humiliation, suspicious demotions, every one of them tied to the same name, Mark Thompson. Jackson read them silently, jaw tightening. Each case had been rerouted, diverted from the chain of escalation. Someone had built a filter, a digital firewall, not to protect the company, but to protect the abuser. A system designed to silence. He downloaded the files, made copies, printed 3 sets. The paper stack was small, but in Jackson's hands it weighed like evidence. Truth bound together by ink and arrogance. To everyone else, he was still just the janitor. But now, the janitor held the company's darkest secrets. When Marta didn't return the next morning, no one said a word. No one filled her shift. No one asked where she went. But Alina did. She clocked in for the night shift without being told, didn't say a thing about it, just showed up like gravity, silent, reliable. She wasn't being paid extra. She didn't want recognition. She didn't ask for anything. She just moved through the empty building with her mop, slow and steady, like someone walking through smoke to save what was left. Jackson watched her from the security feed. He didn't call, didn't interrupt. He just opened his notebook and wrote 1 line. Alina volunteered for night shift. 0 hesitation. He paused with the pen still resting against the page. There was something about her, something sharp and intentional. Her kindness wasn't passive. It was surgical. While men like Mark ruled through fear, people like Alina led by example, without needing a crown or a podium. Later that evening, Jeremy stared at the text box on his screen for 10 minutes before hitting send. Just 3 words. Are you okay? No emojis, no overthinking. He didn't expect a reply. But 10 minutes later, his phone buzzed. The message read, "I'm fine. Thank you for speaking up that day." That was all. No punctuation, no decoration. But it hit him like a punch to the chest. She remembered. Not just what he said, but that he tried. That he didn't stay quiet like everyone else. Jeremy looked at his screen for a long time. In a building where kindness was treated like weakness, her message felt like armor. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. Some silences said more than words ever could. Alina sat alone beside the vending machines, unwrapping the lid of a well-worn lunchbox. Inside, plain rice and steamed vegetables. No heat, no sauce, no flourish. But she ate with quiet steadiness. Mark passed behind her, slowed his stride, and smirked. "You eat like that by choice?" he asked, voice sliding like oil across tile. She didn't respond, kept chewing, eyes down. He leaned closer. Figures, cheap food for cheap hands. He laughed to himself. A few others overheard. One coughed awkwardly, but no one laughed this time. No one joined in. Alina didn't flinch. She didn't feed his need for dominance. She simply took another bite. Calm, solid, unshaken. Jackson saw it all from across the room. Every insult, every suppressed flinch. Mark thought he was strong because he could insult a woman eating rice. But Jackson knew the truth. Real dignity sat in silence, ate cold rice, and refused to look away from itself. Later, in the dim light of the maintenance room, Jackson sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, the cold blue glow of the laptop reflecting on his face. He hit play. The video rolled again, no sound, just image. Mark's hand, the milk. Alina beneath it, her motionless body. The laughter in the background, the silence after. Jackson watched it again and again. Not with rage, but with something heavier. His jaw held still, his eyes burned, not from fury, but from disappointment. Not just in Mark, but in everyone else. In the culture, in the way no one stood up. He paused the frame. Alina's face frozen mid-drip, her eyes steady, unyielding. He stared. What did she already know that everyone else refused to see? Jackson closed the laptop softly, not like closing a file, but like chambering a round. In the open office, Mark's voice rose again. "Everyone, conference room, now!" Chairs scraped, screens went black, people moved, obedience disguised as routine. Mark pointed at a young man in accounting. Barely 25, tie crooked, hands shaky. "You, stand up." The young man rose, eyes wide. Mark circled him like a vulture. "I asked for a report. You delivered it," he said, pausing. "But you didn't smile. You didn't say thank you. You didn't look grateful." The room went silent. "This place rewards humility," Mark said quietly. You're gone." The young man opened his mouth, maybe to defend himself, but Mark had already turned away. "Security will escort you out." Jackson stood in the hallway gripping the mop, harder than he meant to. This wasn't leadership. This was performance violence. It was theater for tyrants, staged in cubicles, dressed in expensive suits. And someone had to rewrite the script. Later that night, the metal locker clicked open with a rusty groan. Jackson reached for his gloves, but his fingers touched something unexpected. A folded white envelope slipped just beneath the shelf. No name, no markings. He opened it slowly. 4 words, handwritten. "I know who you are." Beneath it smaller, "And I'm ready." No signature, no decoration, just the truth. His hand stilled on the note. He didn't need to guess. There was only one person who ever looked at him, not like a janitor, but like a reflection. Alina. She had seen through the disguise. Not because he slipped, but because she knew what to look for. People who lived in silence, who hid their strength under uniforms and small smiles. They recognized their own. Jackson folded the note and slipped it into his back pocket. The pieces were finally moving, and for the first time, he wasn't playing alone. He sat in the soft hum of the maintenance room, the notebook open, the pen steady, the plan nearly complete. He didn't write in sentences anymore, just bullet points. Cold, factual, relentless. Milk dumped on Alina. 6 witnesses. Marta fired during medical leave. Forced overtime in marketing. Verbal threats. Analyst penalized for tone of voice. Jeremy publicly shamed. CCTV footage logged. Every entry sat on the page like a wound reopened. Jackson paused after each line, reviewing security logs, sifting through archived emails, and replaying muffled fragments of conversations overheard in passing. Each event time-stamped, each source verifiable. This wasn't revenge. It was record-keeping. What bled onto the paper wasn't rage. It was proof. A map of rot. A pattern too persistent to be random. Near the bottom of the page, one phrase was circled again and again. Systemic degradation. This wasn't a single bad actor. This was a culture infected at the core, rotting from the inside out, masked by handshakes and fake smiles. The more he wrote, the quieter his breathing became. Like a man not preparing for a fight, but loading each truth like ammunition, not driven by hate, by necessity. War was coming, and Jackson wasn't cleaning floors anymore. He was cleaning house. The building slept under its usual artificial stillness. Chairs tucked in, desks cleared, secrets undisturbed. Jackson moved with surgical calm. In the HR lounge, he placed a pin-sized lens beneath the smoke detector casing, invisible to the eye, but perfectly positioned. Another camera slipped beneath a dusty shelf in Mark's private office, disguised beneath unused file folders. A voice-activated recorder lay dormant inside a supply crate, awaiting whispers it would remember long after humans forgot. No celebration, just calibration. He tested each feed, adjusted each angle, then slipped back into the shadows like he'd never been there at all. In his corner workspace, he plugged into the network. Static, then clarity. Audio from earlier. Mark's voice laughing. HR murmured in the background. Mark again. "Just filed that complaint under trash. That's where it belongs." Jackson replayed the clip. Twice, then once more. Every system Mark once manipulated was now recording him, and the story was finally writing itself without Mark's permission. Elsewhere, Jeremy was still at his desk, finishing reports that nobody read. Near the elevators, Mark stopped him with a smile. Sharp, false, venom dipped in courtesy. You like working here, right? Jeremy nodded, cautious. You spoke out once. I let that slide. But next time, I'll pull your internship so fast you won't have time to say tuition refund. No letter, no job, nothing. Jeremy's throat tightened. His grip on the portfolio clenched. He wanted to speak. He didn't. Mark walked away, smug and sure. Jeremy stood frozen, chest hollow, skin cold. Not angry. Not yet. Just helpless. That kind of helplessness that wraps around your ribs and suffocates hope. From across the hall, Jackson saw it all. He didn't move. He just noted it down, a quiet entry. Fear, manufactured, effective, temporary. Jeremy doesn't need to fight back. He just needs to last. In another part of the building, Alina wrote carefully, each letter blocked, precise. No. Signature. The envelope plain, the sheet inside unlined. But the contents were surgical in detail. Forced resignations misfiled as voluntary exits. Payroll discrepancies against dissenting employees. Surveillance requests denied. Dates, names, verbatim phrases Mark had used behind closed doors. Information Jackson hadn't seen, not even in his private audits. At the bottom, one final line. You're not the only one watching. She folded the paper with deliberate care and dropped it into the janitorial suggestion box, anonymously, intentionally. That night Jackson found it. He read the letter once, then again. This wasn't validation. This was alliance. Two shadows, one war. One carried a notebook. One had keys no one else could copy. The notebook lay open beside him now, half a page left. Names, timestamps, violations. Every entry tighter than the last. He read her final sentence again. You're not the only one watching. He closed the notebook slowly, laid down the pen beside it, folded the rag. Clean crease. No noise, no rush. Just stillness. Then, under his breath, like releasing something he'd held too long, he whispered, "Enough." He stood, rolled up his sleeves, picked up the company-issued badge he'd never once used. Executive access. There were no plans left to make, only steps to take. The floors were clean. Now it was time to clean the system. The email went out at 4:03 p.m. Subject, mandatory staff meeting. Time, tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp. Location, main conference hall. All departments, attendance required, no explanation, no sender. People stared at their screens. HR didn't question it. Department heads forwarded it immediately. The whispers began within minutes. Did you hear anything? Is it layoffs? Something's going down. Mark read the subject line and chuckled. Power move from upstairs, he muttered. Probably another useless restructure. Jeremy read it twice. His lips tightened, but he said nothing. Alina, methodical as ever, simply folded her cleaning cloth slower than usual, like she was preparing for something final. In the maintenance closet, Jackson checked his watch. 21 hours left, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. Mark stood in the hallway, coffee in hand, phone at his ear. Company-wide meeting, he scoffed. Please, waste of time. He sipped. Smirked. Probably some exec trying to save face. Or maybe the janitors are having another emotional meltdown. His lieutenants laughed, light, rehearsed, obligatory. Bet you $5 it's that same guy, the quiet one near the elevators. He turned to gesture at Jackson, who was wiping a handrail nearby. Seriously, what's he even doing here? Sympathy stunt? Jackson looked up. Their eyes met. No anger, no shift in posture. Just a smile, calm, unreadable, quiet as thunderclouds before a storm. Then he returned to polishing the rail. Mark laughed again, shaking his head. He didn't know, he never did. And the most dangerous man in the building was the one he never saw clearly. The conference hall filled with footsteps and nervous breath. Department heads took their places. Interns, assistants, managers all sat in tense rows. At the head of the table sat Mark, legs crossed, fingers steepled. grin wide and smug. "Big turnout," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Maybe they're finally announcing someone above me." A few dry chuckles answered. Then, from the back of the room, Jackson stepped forward. No clipboard, no headset, no seat. Same gray uniform, same name tag, J. Clay. He carried nothing, but in his eyes there was weight. Mark didn't look twice. Why would he? To him, Jackson was just a ghost in coveralls. That's why the trap was perfect. The higher the seat, the harder the fall. The sound of a chair scraping echoed through the room. Jackson pulled one out, but didn't sit. Instead, he unzipped his uniform, slow and deliberate. Beneath it, a fitted slate gray vest, crisp black tie, and an engraved steel badge clipped to his belt. Jackson Claymore, Chief Executive Officer, Eternic Corp., a division of RUS Global. Gasps rippled. Whispers cracked like thunder behind lips. Mark blinked, then squinted, like his brain couldn't accept what his eyes had already confirmed. Jackson turned to the room, voice steady, low, immovable. "No notes today, just clarity." His gaze found Mark, not with fury, not with triumph, with gravity. "For weeks I've been watching, listening, cleaning." A pause. "Not the floors, the culture." And for the first time since the meeting began, no one looked at Mark. They only looked at the man they'd ignored. Until now, no one had moved, no one had spoken. Even the air itself felt thinner, suspended in anticipation. Jackson turned, facing the room completely. His arm rose, steady, and pointed directly at Mark. "You," he said softly, "have rotted this company from the inside out." Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Jackson didn't let him speak. His words cut clean, unshakable. "You humiliated your employees. You buried their complaints. You turned silence into a weapon and called it leadership." Each word hit like a gavel. Jackson stepped forward, calm and unflinching. "And you did it all thinking no one was watching. That people without titles didn't matter. That respect was optional." The silence that followed was louder than any shout. "Today," he said, "that ends." Mark didn't shrink, not physically, but for the first time, the room saw him clearly. Not through his title, not through fear, but through the truth. And truth has a way of stripping a man bare. Behind Jackson, the screen flickered to life. First, hallway footage. Grainy. Mark laughing. Alina drenched in milk. Faces turned away. No one moved. Next, audio. Crisp. Mark's voice. "If they can't hit targets, they can hit the road. Dock their pay. Don't tell them." "No. One's going to care what a janitor says?" A gasp rippled through the room. Screenshots followed, emails rerouted, complaints edited, deleted. Each image struck deeper. No narration, no embellishment. Just truth, playing itself out. By the fourth video, no one looked at Mark. Not in awe, in revulsion. The screen went dark, and no one clapped. They didn't have to. The room had already passed judgment. Mark jumped up, voice cracked. "This is fake. It's edited. I want legal in here now." His hands shook as he turned toward Jackson. "You don't get to judge me. Who even are you?" Jackson stepped forward once. Calm, composed. "I'm the one who cleaned the chair you sat in before you ever earned it." And the room froze. Not out of fear, out of awe. Because that sentence, quiet, factual, held more weight than any accusation. Mark had no reply. His mouth opened, closed. His hands hovered in the air, like reaching for a power that no longer existed. There was nothing left. No title, no allies, no place to hide. Jackson reached into his coat, pulled out a single sheet of paper. Termination order, immediate effect. His name already signed at the bottom. He turned to HR. "Deliver this. Process it now." The HR director hesitated for only a breath. Then an envelope slid across the table. Alina, calm, measured. Her voice was soft, but cut through the room like glass. This letter confirms receipt of formal complaints, timestamps, witness affidavits. Everything's accounted for. The director opened the envelope, read the contents. He nodded. It was done. Mark stared at Alina, not as the woman he once mocked, but as the architect of his fall. The quietest voice in the room had written the ending before the meeting ever began. Jackson turned back to the room, his voice clear, composed. "Effective today," he said. "We are restructuring Eterna. From the inside out. No slideshow, no charts, just change. Anonymous reports will now go directly to the executive board. No gatekeepers, no filters, and let me be clear. Performance will never again override basic decency. And fear," he said, scanning the room, "will never again be mistaken for strength." Stillness. He continued, "If you've ever been overlooked, unheard, underestimated, know this. That era ends now." He turned to the janitor's clock mounted quietly above the back wall. "No more invisible people. Not here. Not ever again." Alina gave a subtle nod. Jeremy exhaled. And for the first time in a long time, the silence inside Eterna felt like peace, not submission. The first clap broke softly, then another, then a wave. It wasn't polite. It was real. Jeremy sat frozen, shoulders trembling. He wiped his eyes, but not fast enough. Jackson walked over and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to bow," he said gently. "You stood up when it mattered. That's more than most men with titles ever do." Jeremy looked up, eyes red. Jackson nodded. "Effective immediately. You're my new assistant, and I don't care how many cups of coffee you've spilled." A few soft laughs followed. Warm, sincere. Jeremy didn't say thank you. He just stood taller. For the first time, he wasn't afraid to be seen. By noon, a table was set up in the atrium. No speeches, no streamers, just one white sheet of paper. Eterna employee commitment. No silence, no prejudice, no exceptions. One by one, employees lined up. Some hesitant, some sure. All ready. Each signed. Some wrote dates, others left only initials. Marta, back in uniform, signed with both hands. Jeremy, still blinking, left a small smile next to his name. Even those who once laughed now stood quietly in line, waiting their turn. Jackson stood off to the side. He didn't smile. He didn't pose. He just watched. Not proud, rooted. Because this wasn't a ceremony. It was a reset. And for the first time, a signature meant more than obligation. It meant belief. The next morning, the building buzzed, but with something new. Lena walked through the doors. No mop, no badge, a crisp white suit. Calm steps. Straight gaze. Some whispered, some stared. But no one spoke. Jackson met her halfway through the atrium. "This is Alina," he said, turning to the crowd. "The reason this investigation began and the reason it succeeded." A pause. "She owns this building. Bought it 3 years ago under her family trust. The floors you stood on, the contracts you signed. She read every complaint before I did." Gasps flickered, but Alina didn't smile. Power never needs to raise its voice. It just enters the room and changes the air. "I didn't come here to expose anyone," she began, voice even, strong. "I came to understand. Because when a company grows, the numbers rise faster than the people, and in that rush, we forget what a workplace is made of." She looked around, not at the managers, but at the interns, the assistants, the janitors. "I needed to see the soul, not the spreadsheets, but how you treat the ones you think don't matter." She took a breath. "That's where the truth lives, in the quietest corners, with the ones you underestimate." The video that started it all, a shaky phone recording of Alina drenched in milk, began circulating. No edits, no sound bites, just truth. Within hours, 1 million views. Then 5. The caption read, "Never underestimate the janitor." Mark never returned an email, never issued a statement, never reapplied. One video followed him like a shadow. And this time, silence worked against him. Jeremy stayed. Not for headlines, but because this place finally felt like his. His name became a whisper in break rooms. Be a Jeremy, meaning speak, even if your voice shakes. And Jackson, now visible in every hallway, stood not as CEO, but as someone who simply refused to look away. Change, he said in a quiet staff address, doesn't start with titles. It starts when someone finally says, enough. The room didn't erupt. It settled, because peace doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it's a silence no longer laced with fear. Late afternoon. Sunlight poured into the corners of a quiet office. Alina sat behind a corner desk. No applause, no performance. Her name etched into the plate. Alina Voss, Executive Advisor. She reached into a drawer, pulled out a tissue, wiped one faint spot of dried milk from the glass. Missed on purpose? Maybe. She smiled. Not with triumph, with knowing. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just finishes the job, cleanly, silently, completely. Months passed. Something in the building had shifted. People spoke up. Meetings grew softer, more curious. Policies changed. Behaviors did too. And it didn't begin with a board vote. It began with a woman no one saw coming, holding a mop, carrying quiet power. Real change never falls from above. It rises. From the overlooked, from the steady, from the brave. Have you ever been ignored, dismissed, told you didn't belong because of your title, your clothes, or your seat in the room? If so, you're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, you carry the one thing the world can't take: clarity, kindness, and the courage to keep showing up when no one's watching. If this story spoke to you, leave a single dot below. Just one. To say, I'm here. I saw this. And if you believe that quiet strength can still change the world, subscribe, because the world doesn't need louder power, it needs truer hearts. And never forget, sometimes the janitor owns the entire building. And the person you overlooked, they already own the floor beneath your feet. Thank you for listening. See you in the next story.